Okay, here we go, folks. Please stay off the concrete. Where's the finger? No, no. You just want to get cute. Don't. Face out. Citizens, to speak to you tonight.
I'll talk to you about the past, about our future, and about very specific concrete plans
That will enable this country.
Can't hear you.
That will enable
This country to strengthen itself
in a very difficult.
Even the technologies of this age need some human assistance. I'm going to talk to you tonight about this country the way I see it, the truth as I best understand it. I don't want to overstate the case. I don't want to understate it. I want to give to you the best of my thinking, of my insight into where this country is, how it is we got here, and what we must do together to mobilize, to join together, to renew and restore the spirit of this nation. I have no doubt about our ability to achieve that goal, but I know that nothing is possible unless we can understand exactly where we are at this historic moment and how we got here. The political language that we hear is debased. The level of cynicism that many of us feel, many here tonight and across this country, makes it difficult to speak in a human, thoughtful, truthful way about our country. I'll try to do that without the cliches and then give you very specific, concrete plans on where we should go from here. Now, back after World War II, this country was unchallenged, the leading country in the world. We dominated economically, militarily. We had the world as before us, and we were its leader. And the old adversaries, Japan and Germany and much of Japan, were in rubble. And we joined in a Marshall Plan. We rebuilt them, and in rebuilding these other countries, we rebuilt ourselves, and we expanded a level of prosperity that increased at a rate of about 3% a year. And out of this dividend, it's a productivity dividend each year, in the 50s and the 60s, we could afford and did practice in many ways a very generous politics. Wages went up, profits went up, taxes went up, government went involved in new and very diverse programs. But as we started moving into the 60s, those former countries that were in rubble now had rebuilt themselves, had reindustrialized, and now became our competitors on the world stage, and began even here in our own country to supply more and more of the products that formerly we had excelled in. And very gradually, the productivity rate of our country began to decline. In the early 60s, we used to actually export oil to the rest of the world. Our steel industry, our automobile industry, our television industry, our manufacturers of watches, of cameras, we had no peer. And then as we hit the mid-60s, a decision was made by our president at that time, in many ways, I think, because of his own vision of bringing American democracy to other countries, to expand a war in Vietnam, spend hundreds of billions of dollars abroad, and at the same time attempt to create a great society here at home. And as this policy, as it was called at that time, guns and butter, went forward, the historic momentum of this country began to unravel and decline. Instead of paying for that war and that great society out of current dollars, there was employed a fiscal gimmickry, a borrowing from the future by the printing of more and more money, by the running up of huge deficits that only became very obvious in years to come. That borrowing, we now know, has come from us in 1980 and will come from us in the years to come. This country has followed a path that Rome and Germany after World War I and many other countries have pursued, running the printing presses, putting more currency into the system at a far greater rate than it produced goods and services. And as we began this decline in the 60s and the 70s, what had been a growth in our own wealth of 3% a year declined to something below 1%. And so instead of more wages out of real goods produced and more government taxes out of our increase, we began to fight over our decrease, our decline in purchasing power. And more people spent their time figuring out ways of avoiding government regulations, avoiding taxes. More and more people felt, as the inflation rate crept up from 3% to 5% to 7% and on upward, that they had to borrow, that they had to buy often what they didn't even need. The credit card came into vogue. In the 50s, you barely saw it. In the 60s and the 70s, private debt, public debt increased, expanded, accelerated, trying to prop up this slowing economy that was once the giant of this planet. All the while, Japan, Germany, other countries, South Korea, Taiwan are making cars and watches and other products of great quality. They're entering into this latter part of the 20th century with great momentum. And we, on our part, continue to inflate because our leaders can't tell us the truth, that there is a decline. There's a decline because now the cheap raw materials that went into this great economic machine are now expensive. The third world wants its share, and thus the Arab oil embargo, the quadrupling in the price of oil, and all of these things coming together to make it very difficult the continued economic momentum of our own nation. And so we come to the latter part of the 70s. We find that presidents come and go, the political forces filled with cynicism, one party, one change. It is very hard to sustain that sense of unity, that sense of dynamism, that sense of greatness that we had as a country. We have resorted to the printing press. Our growth rate has declined now. It is negative. There is not an increase in our actual output. We find more and more foreign products inundating our society. We look at our third largest automobile company. We find it's bankrupt. We look at our second largest automobile company. It has lost $1 billion and was only bailed out by its own foreign sales. We look at our number one automobile company, and it has to give people $400 or $500 to get them to buy a car. Truly, it is time to mobilize. It's time to restore and rebuild this country so that we can take care of our own, so that we can again provide ideas and initiatives to the rest of this world. And so we cannot look at cities like the South Bronx or Detroit or other places declining, looking like the remnants of some city after World War II. But rather we can rebuild, and we can stand proud, and we can eliminate the poverty and the deterioration in our own society. It's come time to reindustrialize, and it's not going to hopefully take a war like what happened to Japan and Germany, where you literally have to level the society before you begin to rebuild. Certainly we are wise enough and thoughtful enough and know now the horrors of that particular path that we can rebuild, reindustrialize, invest in the new technologies, in protecting the environment, in educating our people so that we can have a society that once again is on the upward momentum rather than this recessive, restrictive society that is moving toward protective tariffs, toward inefficiency, and in many ways repeating the 1930s, where we want now protective tariffs because our industries can't compete. Other countries then retaliate, world trade slows down, people get poorer, and then war inevitably follows over the competition for the scarce resources. I say that is one path, but the path that I decide to follow, and that I know that if we can all join together and agree to a plan, a call to arms, not for war, but for peace, we can reindustrialize this country. We can regain a self-reliance and an independence that will serve our human needs. Now, there are three parts to that. First of all, you got to stabilize the economy. You have to stop the inflation. And you do that first very quickly. We are producing every year, 8% the money supply goes up, even though the amount of goods only goes up 2%. We've got to stop the printing press. Government can't print any more money than the society is making goods. You got to balance the budget. You have to be able to index the income tax so that when the government inflates your pay raise and it really isn't any more purchasing power, you lower your tax bracket. You don't give government more money because of its own mistake in creating the inflation. And then you exempt personal savings up to $20,000 from any income tax to encourage thrift, to encourage saving. That's what builds for the future. And then you've got to give some incentive for people to once again buy in America, buy into the companies of this nation, and I would allow a tax exemption for the first $5,000 of dividend income that could be received. But that is just the first step in a beginning stabilization of the economy and inflation. But still, we have to rebuild. We have to reindustrialize. We have to be able to retool, re-equip, so American workers can have the tools so that they can produce just as good as anyone else. 20 years ago we did, but now we're not, but we can. And I know we can if we're prepared to make that commitment. It's an agreement. It's a joining together of the people of this nation. That's all it takes. It's our own mind changing and following through on what must be done. Now, how do we do that? We develop a strategic plan to industrialize these countries, whether it's the trains or the cars or whatever it is, the new era technology. We have to commit to it. And we do it first by having a plan with labor, organized labor, business, and government pulling together. I've seen what they've done in Japan. They cooperate together, they lay out a plan, they say we will produce a car that will dominate the world markets, and they go do it. And they work together. The unions, the employers, the government, they're not in this adversary pulling and hauling and fighting and tugging. We're at the point now where we can't afford that. We don't have that luxury of this adversary process. It's time for a joint effort. And toward that objective, as we lay out an economic plan to rebuild our country, I would give tax incentives and lower interest credit to those who participate in rebuilding what this society needs and getting off this mounting debt and waste and packaging and excessive